Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, good morning and good afternoon for those joining us from the Middle East and elsewhere. Welcome to the annual event of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, held on the margins of the 69th session of the CSW. For those joining from around the world, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sofian Akmal Abdul Karim, Deputy Permanent Representative of Malaysia, and I've been asked to chair this meeting on behalf of Mr. Koli Sek, Chair of the Committee and PR of Senegal to the UN. On behalf of the committee, let me express our appreciation for you being here today. Since its creation in 1975, the mandate of this committee has been to advocate for the promotion of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination, independence, sovereignty, and the right of refugee to return, as provided under international law and enshrined in the UN Charter. The committee advocates for a just, lasting, and comprehensive settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace within secure and recognized pre-1967 borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine. The committee consistently calls for the end of the unlawful Israeli occupation and the halt of illegal settlements. In addition, the committee consistently calls for the recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state, nowadays recognized by 149 countries, as an investment in peace. Last year in 2024, the International Court of Justice, in its advisory opinion, declared the prolonged Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory illegal and called for its end within 1 year. While the whole world has been watching on live TV the ongoing Nakba and the tragic situation in Gaza that amounts to plausible genocide. Unfortunately, as of today, the mandate of this committee remains valid and largely unaccomplished. The committee's annual event on the margin of the CSW offers a unique opportunity for committee members and observers and the public at large to assess the impact on women of Israelis' unlawful policies and practices since the Nakba to the present day throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. In 2025, the CSW event was supposed to focus on the 30 years of the Beijing Declaration and Plan of Action, the 25 years of Security Council Resolution 1325, and the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Instead, we have to focus on a horrific attack on Palestinian population in Gaza and women and children in particular. Since 7 October 2023, Palestinians in Gaza have endured the most brutal and unprecedented levels of violence, resulting in over 61,000 Palestinian deaths, 70% of them women and children, and over 900 casualties in the West Bank. This is according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. This was compounded by the 16 years of an Israeli blockade, which have turned into a humanitarian catastrophe. Nearly 1 million women and girls, children and newborns in Gaza are disproportionately bearing the burden of the conflict, as reported by several UN agencies and NGOs. The deliberate restriction to access to food, water, healthcare and sanitation, as well as the destruction of medical facilities, is bringing the over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza to the brink of famine and death. All this in addition to the massive displacement and ethnic cleansing. Ladies and gentlemen, the parties reached a temporary ceasefire on 19 January 2024, which led to the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. However, overnight on 18 March, Israeli authorities ended the fragile ceasefire and unleashed air attacks across Gaza, which killed over 400 Palestinians, mostly women and children. The committee repeatedly called for respect for the terms of the ceasefire, which should be made permanent and unhindered humanitarian access. In this holy month of Ramadan, the victims' pain is felt even more acutely. This human-made tragedy will stain our collective conscience for generations to come. Attacks and destruction of hospitals and limited access to healthcare affecting more acutely pregnant and nursing women, the delivery of babies, and postnatal care are particularly painful to witness. The panelists today will discuss this issue. In light of the catastrophic situation in Gaza, today's event is dedicated to discussing the destruction of the health system in Palestine, a lifeline in peril for women and girls. We will highlight the challenges faced by Palestinians, especially women and children, and the long-lasting intergenerational trauma inflicted upon Palestinians through endless cycles of war, occupation, and siege. We will explore the international community's role in delivering humanitarian relief, supporting reconstruction, aiding victims, and ensuring accountability for the perpetrators. With that, let us now start with today's program. I have the honor of giving the floor to Ambassador Feda Abdelhady, my friend and Deputy Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations. Then we will hear from the panelists, and after their presentation, we will open the floor for questions and comments from committee members and observers, and then from the audience. Please note that participation in the virtual Zoom platform is limited to UN member and observer states as well as panelists. This event is also being recorded and streamed live on UN Web TV, and it will be posted on www.un.org/unispal, the committee's website. Now, let me give the floor to Ambassador Feda. Ambassador Feda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Sufyan, my dear brother, and we thank the committee for bringing us together in this important and timely discussion today. Mr. Chair, Doctors Mofokeng, Syed, and Sukkar, colleagues and friends, Palestinian women have borne decades of misery and injustice as a result of Israel's illegal colonial occupation, apartheid regime, and constant military aggressions in what is an ongoing Nakba against the Palestinian people. The gravity of the situation being faced by Palestinian women in occupied Palestine, in Gaza in particular, defies apt words. Though Israel's siege continues, obstructing international investigations and reporting, what we do know of the impact on women of its genocidal war and the humanitarian catastrophe it has wrought is harrowing. As you correctly noted, Mr. Chair, women and children are over 70% of the casualties. At least 12,410 Palestinian women have been killed by the Israeli occupying forces, 94 of them murdered in just the past days since Israel resumed its onslaught on Gaza. Many of these women have been massacred alongside their children and entire families. And this terrible figure does not include the women among the thousands of people who remain missing, crushed to death under the rubble. Mortality rates for women are rising, just as they are for the rest of the population. The Lancet Medical Journal found that Israel's war on Gaza has reduced life expectancy by at least 30 years. Also, 2,000 Palestinian women and girls have lost one or more limbs, suffering amputations, and left disabled for life as a result of Israeli military attacks. Minimal access to maternal services, including for reproductive emergencies, also continues to threaten women's lives. Thousands have been forced to bear the pain, humiliation, and indignation of menstruation and childbirth without hygiene supplies, water and sanitation, or privacy, with pregnant women forced to give birth in dangerous, unsanitary conditions and deprived of medical care, as over 84% of health facilities have been destroyed by Israel. According to the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq, Israel's methodical attacks on maternity wards, combined with its policy of forced starvation, have severely impacted pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, with 95% facing food poverty. This in turn has increased the vulnerability of mothers and their babies to malnutrition, illness, and death, rendering Israel's genocide, and I quote, an attack on the natural growth of Palestinian society. While a primary mission of a healthcare system as we know it is to treat illness and injury, it is principally about the preservation of life, making access to healthcare essential to a people's survival and longevity generation after generation. Thus, Israel's attacks on hospitals, healthcare workers, and humanitarians in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, and its obstruction of medical supplies and medical evacuations not only violate the Palestinian people's right to health and are cruel, unlawful acts of collective punishment against millions of children, women, and men, but violate their fundamental right to life. And as we speak, women and children, who constitute over 50% of the 1.9 million forcibly displaced in Gaza and of the over 40,000 forcibly displaced in the West Bank, also continue to be deprived of shelter, left homeless and impoverished, and deprived of life's essentials by Israel as it weaponizes food and water, leading to widespread starvation and dehydration, endangering their well-being and hastening their destruction as a people in whole or in part. These systematic, calculated Israeli policies and actions not only violate UN resolutions and ICJ advisory opinions and provisional measures orders, but constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide. As Israel continues waging this war on the Palestinian people, dashing the hopes brought by the ceasefire agreement it has now shredded, it is inflicting more harm and further weakening our people's ability to cope with the extreme hardships caused by its illegal occupation and their ability to survive its genocidal assault. It is difficult, if not impossible, for those of us who have not lived such horrors to comprehend the impact of these devastating life conditions on women and their families. So for the remainder of my intervention, I just wish to read a few testimonies of women in Gaza, recently shared by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights on the occasion of International Women's Day, to convey in their own words the traumas they've endured, a very small glimpse of the suffering of millions. I begin with Noor al-Dalu, 18 years old. Quote, "An Israeli missile killed my mother, my sister, and my niece, and amputated my legs. I was thrown 10 meters away by the force of the explosion. When I woke up, I didn't recognize my body. I couldn't scream or cry as pain spoke louder than words. I can no longer walk, move, or live my life as I once did. My future has become uncertain, without a home, without education, and without treatment. The days feel unbearably long, weighed down by endless thoughts of how did Israel deprive me of leading a normal human life? How did they turn me in an instant into a person with a disability, without a mother or a sister? It is an indescribable feeling. I am still waiting to be allowed to travel for treatment and to get a prosthetic limb that will give me a chance to regain part of what I lost." Tahrir al-Arayan, 34 years old. Quote, "I was 9 months pregnant when the IOF raided our house in Khan Yunis and sent a dog equipped with a camera to search it. The dog bit me, causing critical injuries to my thigh and severe bleeding. The dog not only bit me, but also dragged me on the ground for over 15 meters as I tried to push it away and beg the soldiers to stop. But they were laughing as if they were watching an entertaining scene. I was already in immense pain from the pregnancy, and the bleeding only made it worse. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with preeclampsia, requiring an urgent C-section. Unfortunately, I lost my baby due to the preeclampsia and excessive bleeding. I had been eagerly waiting for the birth of my child and holding him in my arms, but the Israeli army mercilessly stole that from me. To this day, I am still suffering an indescribable psychological pain. Zaynab Abul-Ata, 49 years old, widow and mother of 6 children. After my husband was killed, responsibility weighed heavily on me. He was the backbone and breadwinner of our family. I have no source of income to support us, nor enough food for my children due to the Israeli siege. With every meal, I prioritize my children over myself, but exhaustion overwhelms me, along with the feeling of helplessness in securing their most basic rights. And this testimony, shared by Al-Haq from Nariman Al-Fasih, 22, a mother of 2 children, who lost her newborn baby girl Sila to the cold in a displacement tent in Khan Yunis. Quote, I gave birth in the British hospital on 3 December 2024. Yes, my baby girl was healthy, but I had no clothes, milk, or diapers for her. Her name was Sila, 22 days old. I really tried to keep her warm, but had no blankets or clothes for her, nor food. On 25 December, it was very cold. We slept on the sand. She breastfed normally. At 5 a.m., I woke up to feed my daughter. My husband lifted the blanket off her and saw her frozen cold. Blood was pouring from her nose and mouth. I was shocked. My husband took her to the British hospital, but she could not be saved. The doctors told us she died from hypothermia. I was heartbroken. I need to keep my 2 remaining children warm so I do not lose them as well. I leave you with these somber testimonies as just some of the hardships suffered by Palestinian women and girls as vital context as we listen to the Special Rapporteur and esteemed panelists. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador Feda, thank you for your presentation and for framing the issue of our event today and for our further discussion. Let me now give the floor to our 3 panelists who will cover different aspects of the impact of the war on Gaza on the health system. And later we will also watch a powerful video testimony. Our first speaker, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng from South Africa, was appointed in 2020 as the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health. Dr. Mofokeng is a medical doctor with expertise advocating for universal health access, HIV care, youth-friendly services, and family planning. She has been commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality in South Africa, working on issues of children and adolescents, persons with disabilities, migrants, and persons living with HIV/AIDS. Doctor, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And good morning to Ambassador Feda as well. And thank you to all of you for being here to share and also create space. I think when we planned this session, we had not anticipated that it was going to happen at the back of new escalation of attacks in Gaza. And I welcome this opportunity to speak to you here as a childhood survivor of apartheid South Africa. but also in my capacity as the UN Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And although the title is long, I think it's very important because it encompasses all of that is required for everyone everywhere to be able to live a life of dignity. We have watched the horror of a genocide in Gaza that has escalated in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Lebanon as well, unfolding for many, many months now, representing a continued display of a global solidarity that is recalcitrant but also repugnant in how global allies and powerful empires around the world have rallied around the onslaught of Palestinian people. This ongoing enactment of decades-long genocidal plans which have come into fruition, the systemic and the sustained imperialist violence experienced by Palestinians every single day since the occupation. The Gaza Strip is not a natural geographical point. And as we are in New York, many of us having arrived for the Commission on the Status of Women for the 69th session, we know that the assessment of the current challenges that affect the implementation of the Platform for Action and Plus 30 Beijing and the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and its contribution towards the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development would be incomplete without this important spotlight on the ongoing genocide. The unsilencing of CSW 69 is mandatory. We cannot continue to convene in spaces ignoring or trying to ignore as if we live in perfect bubbles. The destruction of the health system created by this genocide is incompatible with the realization of the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And even more so, it's disproportionately impacting children, women, and girls. Israel and its allies in Europe and America have ignored the International Court of Justice. They've ignored UN experts and continue to commit immeasurable number of violations of the special protection afforded to civilians, children, and medical personnel under international humanitarian law, but also alongside the widespread violations of other international human rights laws. As we have watched that the practice of medicine is under attack by Israel, and just days into the war, medical infrastructure was being irreparably damaged. Doctors, healthcare workers, nurses, ambulance staff, and other healthcare workers were being tortured, ill-treated, harassed, detained, and some have died in prisons with signs of their torture. This harassment on healthcare infrastructure and healthcare worker directly impacts the ability of women and children to be able to access facilities, commodities, information that they require for their sexual and reproductive health, which is an integral element of their right to health. And we know that many obstacles stand between individuals and their enjoyment to sexual and reproductive health. And these obstacles are interrelated and entrenched and operate at different levels in clinical care, at the level of health systems, and the underlying determinants of health. And these are the exact levels of society, the levels of health systems that Israel continues to attack. They attack healthcare workers and infrastructure and clinical care. They attack the infrastructure at the level of health systems and commodities and supplies, and they continue to attack the underlying determinants of health. The genocide has aggravated the impact on sexual and reproductive health rights. We have seen ongoing sexual and physical assaults on women from medical teams in hospital facilities, but also women and children who are displaced. pregnant women who are not able to receive adequate nutrition and health care, not only putting their lives at risk, but the life of the fetuses and the children they carry. We know that young people generally face obstacles when accessing information and services around sexual and reproductive health. And therefore, we understand that in a genocide, the kinds of violations resulting to their right to health, when because of a genocide, they have another obstacle of why they cannot reach these important services and information. And my mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur has received ongoing information regarding arrest and detention of healthcare workers, and also information on the lack of medical equipment, medical personnel, and also continued harassment of personnel while doing their jobs. I want to just draw us attention to why we must consider ourselves and commit ourselves to ending this genocide, but to also see it within the context of the broader imperialist agenda, a colonial agenda that is also rooted and connected to other forms of oppression, and therefore the struggle to end it must be rooted and located again within the other systems of liberation. The health consequences of racism and discrimination can persist and be passed down from one generation to the next through the body's biological memory of harmful experiences. And so experiencing colonialism, imperialism, slavery, a genocide will continue to manifest itself in poor and preventable health outcomes. And with such glaring disparities in maternal mortality and morbidity, as well as higher risks of communicable and non-communicable diseases, we cannot continue Israel's or allow them to continue with impunity. We cannot allow the silence of the world leaders. This sends a very dangerous message. The International Court of Justice has already recognized the unlawfulness of and made clear that Israel must unconditionally end its ongoing presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. This says it is unlawful, it must be unconditional in how it ends its presence. So we must continue to insist, we must continue to work and build across movements to ensure that the rights of women and girls in Gaza are protected and promoted, and that their right to human dignity, life, non-discrimination, equality, their right to control their own health and body and be partners in their own health care, including their rights to be free from non-consensual medical treatment and experimentations, is supported and promoted. And it's my commitment as a mandate holder of the United Nations to continue to do everything with the methods that I have at my disposal to continue to advocate and to fight for everyone and all of the oppressed people everywhere in the world to ensure that the decades-long genocide, systemic and sustained imperialist oppression does end, but finally that there will be consequence and accountability in ways we are yet to see. Thank you very much, Chair, and I hand over to my fellow panelists for their contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you for your presentation and for your insights. We now turn the floor to Dr. Mimi Syed. She is a board-certified emergency medicine physician and an assistant clinical professor at the University of Washington and Washington State University. She is a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Syed served in Gaza from August to September 2024 and again in December 2024 at both Al-Aqsa Hospital and Nasser Hospital, and she will share her experience in those months in Gaza. I can see Dr. Syed on the screen. Doctor, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to talk to you all today. It seems most appropriate to concentrate on women and children. Most of the patients that we saw, that I saw, were more than 70% women and children. When I was there in August, I saw most of the assaults happening on children less than 12 years old. And when I returned in December, I never thought that the situation would get worse. It was exponentially worse. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the types of injuries that I saw that disproportionately affected children. Because I worked in the emergency department and in the trauma bay, in August, I saw more than 18 cases of children under the age of 12 that came in with gunshot wounds. These were single shots to the head or the chest. I have at least 18 that are documented by me alone. When I was back in December, I saw more situations, more illnesses that disproportionately affected children. I had the opportunity to work at Al-Aqsa in the pediatric emergency department, where I spoke to mothers and mothers who brought in their children. And I had a little bit of a chance to speak to them. And I'll share with you some of the stories from that time. I remember a 2-year-old little boy who was brought in by his mother. He was almost neon orange colored, and he had jaundice. He was 2 years old, about the age of my son, and he was so much smaller than him that it struck me. I asked the mom what happened, and she said that he had contracted hepatitis A. She showed me a picture of him from when he was 7 months old, and he was a normal, happy, beaming baby. And what I saw before me was a 2-year-old that was motionless because of pain. He was in so much pain from moving because his abdomen was so distended that he just lay there still. She had gotten approval for medical evacuation. She even was able to have a hospital willing to give him a liver transplant, but she was repeatedly denied by the Israeli military, by the Israeli government from evacuating and getting the treatment for her son. It broke my heart, and it shattered me to tell her that there's nothing we can do for her child. She picked him up and she walked out, and I'll never forget that image of that baby staring at me with those orange eyes, and the mother leaving in despair because we could do nothing for her. When I was in Gaza, it was evident to me from the very first day that this is an absolute premeditated and deliberate attack on the growth of this population, on the growth of a Palestinian population. I spoke to mothers who came in, bringing their baby in, their preterm infant in. One mother I spoke to said, "My baby is not moving like normally." I asked her, "What's wrong?" She said, "Well, my baby's not moving her legs." Her baby was about 2 months old. When I examined the baby, I noticed a small hole on the back, which told me that she had spina bifida. This is a condition that is completely preventable if mom had the proper nutrients, if she had something as simple as folate, if she had something as simple as prenatal care. This poor mother had no food. She wasn't able to feed her baby even after having a small preterm infant because there was no formula in the market. She couldn't buy any formula for her child. She couldn't produce the breast milk that her baby needed. So not only was this child, this baby, suffering from a lifelong disabling condition, but also was failure to thrive, which means she didn't have enough food to even survive. We could give her small boxes of formula, but that was not going to be long lasting. I saw so many cases of water contamination, illnesses that were a direct result of water contamination. One case that we saw was a 9-month-old baby that was brought in repeatedly for dehydration. This baby had suffered from diarrhea, chronic diarrhea, over and over again. We would treat him with fluids, and the baby would go right back to the conditions, the deplorable living conditions in the tent. I found out the high cases of kidney failure that we saw were not only due to the high levels of E. coli, but the high levels of salt in the water, because there was no ability to filter the water. I spoke to the people responsible for filtering this water, and they told me they didn't have any of the membranes or the solvents needed because Israel denied that from entering into Gaza. This baby that I'm referring to, the 9-month-old baby, eventually died from something so simple, diarrhea, and kidney failure, multi-organ failure. Completely preventable, completely preventable. We saw this so often. This is just one of thousands of cases. I saw newborns that died of hypothermia while I was there in Al-Aqsa. When I was in Al-Aqsa, I thought to myself in December, when I get back, it's going to be ceasefire and the shelter, the tents will be allowed in, and we won't see this hypothermia anymore. 8 cases of hypothermia. We had babies that died in tents, just the known cases. That was 8 babies that we knew of. In January, when I returned, I thought this is going to get better. But again, we had 8 more newborn babies that died, completely preventable. And this was after the ceasefire agreement because the Israeli government denied the entry of shelter, of temporary housing, and of tents. This is completely unacceptable. And this is a deliberate target on the babies and the growth of the population. I want to read to you a quote from one of the doctors that I worked with very closely. Her name was Dr. Amira, and she worked very closely with pregnant women. Begin quote, "As a medical doctor in Gaza, I have witnessed unimaginable suffering. I delivered a baby inside a tent in Mawasi with no medical supplies, no privacy, and no guarantee of safety of the mother or child. But one of the most devastating moments of my life was in the ER at Nasser Medical Complex, where I saw a mother bleeding from everywhere, lying on the ground of the ICU because there were no beds. She had been injured in an Israeli attack, and despite everything we did, we couldn't save her or the baby. They both died in front of me, and all of the ER doctors were helpless in the face of this deliberate brutality." This was something we witnessed regularly when I was at Nasser and when I was at Al-Aqsa. We had no medical resources to take care of patients. Even if we were able to initially save their life, we didn't have basic things like cleaning agents, disinfectant products, things to prevent contamination of wounds. One day when I was at Nasser, we ran out of gauze, so we couldn't do surgery for 2 days. The surgical gowns that were once allowed to enter were no longer allowed, and we ran out. The medications that we needed for pain and sedation completely ran out. In August, when I was there, the temperatures were so high, there was no air conditioner, and the medications were ineffective. Even if we had the medications, they weren't working. All of these things are unnecessary and completely preventable. And all I can say is this is a direct attack on the growth of this population of women and children. That is what I witnessed firsthand, and I continue to see. Unfortunately, in the last couple of days, we have witnessed this resuming. It has been unbearable to see. It is one of the cruelest things that I could ever imagine after a proposed and very loose ceasefire. The people of Gaza, the Palestinians, had a little bit of hope during Ramadan. There were my colleagues down there that I made friends with, very close friends of mine, were having a normal sense of life for a little while. And this surprise and deliberate, premeditated attack from the Israeli government took place a couple of days ago, and over 400 people have been killed, most of those women and children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Syed, for sharing your personal experience in Gaza, the moving testimony, and for your powerful calls to action. We will now watch a video of a powerful personal testimony by Ms. Zaynab Al-Ghunaimi. She is the Director General of the Palestinian Center for Legal Research, Consulting, and Protection for Women, and will recount her experience in Gaza. Ms. Al-Ghunaimi is a Palestinian from Rafah in Gaza and holds a master's degree in administrative law and a bachelor degree from Cairo University. She established the Palestinian Center for Legal Research, Consulting, and Protection for Women, which aims at enhancing women's social and legal rights to achieve equality, justice, and democracy in Palestine society.
أنا زينب الغنيمي، مديرة عامة لمركز الأبحاث والاستشارات القانونية والحماية للمرأة. أحييكن وأحييكم بمناسبة اليوم العالمي للمرأة. أنا الناجية من حرب إبادة جماعية في قطاع غزة استمرت 15 شهرا. هل تعرفون وتعرفن أنني غير مصدقة أنني أتحدث إليكم اليوم؟ لأنني لم أكن أتوقع أن أبقى على قيد الحياة حتى هذه اللحظة. لذلك أنا سعيدة بأنني نجوت، وسعيدة بأن هناك أخريات نجون مثلي كي نستمر في دورنا وأن نكمل مشوارنا من أجل بناء بلادنا، من أجل دعم نسائنا وفتياتنا، من أجل إعلاء صوتنا، من أجل محاسبة هذا الاحتلال الإسرائيلي البغيض الذي حاول أن يقضي علينا في حرب إبادة جماعية وحرب إبادة إنجابية أيضا. خاض ضدنا حرب تجويع قاسية قاصدا إبادتنا ونحن على قيد الحياة. نعم، نحن نجونا ما بين الطلقة والطلقة. أنا نجوت ما بين القذيفة والمدفع، وما بين الغارة والأخرى، وما بين مركز نزوح إلى مركز نزوح آخر، ولكننا استمرينا في العطاء واستمرينا في الصمود من أجل أن نحيا وأن ننتصر لقضايانا وأن نغيث نساءنا وفتياتنا. ونشكر كل من قدم لنا خلال هذه الفترة العصيبة الدعم من أجل أن نستمر في العطاء. نعم، نشكر كل المؤسسات النسوية التي قدمت لنا الدعم غير المشروط من أجل أن نغيث نساءنا وننهض بهن، وأن نغيث فتياتنا، وأن نحميهن ليس فقط من غدر الاحتلال ومن الحرب، أن نحميهن أيضا من كافة أشكال الانتهاك لحقوقهن. الكثيرات ممن انتهكن حقوقهن سواء من قبل جيش الاحتلال الذي حاول القضاء على حياتهن، والذي حاول أيضا أن يكشف خصوصيتهن بالتحرش ومحاولة الاغتصاب لأكثر من حالة وقصة. اليوم أنا أخاطبكن وأعلي صوتي كي ينضم صوتكن إلى صوتي كي نطالب بإنهاء هذا الاحتلال البغيض وفق قرار محكمة العدل الدولية، وأن نحاسب مجرمي الاحتلال وفق قرار المحكمة الجنائية الدولية. نعم، نحن اليوم نطالبكم ونطالبكن بالمزيد من العون، بالمزيد من الدعم من أجل بناء مستقبل أفضل لنسائنا وفتياتنا، من أجل أن يصلوا بمساحات آمنة إلى العلم وإلى العمل وإلى بناء النفس وإلى الاستقرار بين جدران غير مكشوفة خصوصيتهن. أشكركن لأنكن استمعتن إلي، وأشكركن لأنكن ستواصلن الدعم لنا وتناصرن قضايانا. شكرا شكرا مجددا. المستشارة القانونية زينب الغنيمي من غزة المحاصرة.
With that, well, I have on my list the next speaker, Dr. Adlah Sukkar. I see Dr. Adlah on the screen. Dr. Sukkar is a pulmonologist and clinical informaticist. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Northern Virginia. She is the daughter of an American mother and a Syrian father, and she credits her parents' unwavering commitment to human rights as a driving force behind her own advocacy efforts. Her advocacy for Palestine spans decades, becoming even more personal after her marriage to Dr. Haddad. In November 2023, she became an early member of Doctors Against Genocide, a grassroots coalition of healthcare workers who came together in uproar against the unfolding genocide in Gaza. With that introduction, Doctor, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you all for having me. I was asked today to speak on the collapsing healthcare system in Gaza, and frankly, as all of us can share, it's very hard to keep up given all that has been happening. As many of us know, predating October of 23, Gaza lacked adequate healthcare infrastructure, specialty care, and access to supplies for many, many years. But there has been an obvious and rapid deterioration over the last year and a half due to the sheer volume of casualties, ongoing bombardment, systemic targeting of healthcare infrastructure, targeting of staff, blockade of entry of medical aid and medical personnel. Prior to the quote-unquote ceasefire on January 19th, there had been 670 documented attacks in Gaza on healthcare, with at least 886 fatalities related to those attacks. In late February, the WHO released their 8th update detailing conditions on the ground, with the strong caveat that the more recent reinstitution of a complete blockade on supplies and the rapid re-escalation and attacks in the recent days have impact on that data. But 18 out of 35 of pre-existing hospitals were listed as only partially functional, with 17 completely non-functional. And colleagues on the ground have explained that the term partially functional is a very loose term to describe extremely limited capacity to provide any sort of level of medical service. And beyond the loss of infrastructure, ORs, hospitals continue to lack adequate fuel, medicines, supplies, and staff. Essential items like CT scanners, MRIs, C-arms for orthopedic repairs, ventilators, generators, oxygen concentrators, wheelchairs, crutches, scissors, chemotherapy drugs, and anesthesia continue to be forbidden from entry by the Israeli forces due to being labeled as dual-use items. And to paraphrase a colleague who is currently volunteering in Gaza, she says, I am used to being able to order scans, to make a diagnosis, and provide a treatment plan. But people and patients who are not deceased on arrival are dying, waiting for scans. And even when I can get a scan, often I cannot render care or even palliation as they die due to lack of supplies. Others with what would appear as simple injuries are dying from severe malnutrition and the ability to heal even very small wounds. And it was her testimony that there have been continued daily and numerous attacks on children during this period labeled as a ceasefire from quadcopters, with grossly inadequate uptick in supplies in order to try and render care to those casualties. I have another colleague who returned from Gaza in January, who explained that beyond providing medical care, he felt that his primary role was to protect Palestinian physicians with his physical presence, noting that the presence of foreign nationals provided some relative level of safety from Palestinian physicians from active bombardment, but only really truly while on hospital grounds and with no guarantee of safety. And with that in mind, I think it's particularly disturbing to hear that reports of upwards of 50% of foreign physicians were denied entry on mission work in February of this year. And when you couple that with the sheer volume of medical personnel that have been taken into custody, who remain in custody without charge, who have been killed or remain unaccounted for, the impact on the overall ability to deliver care is absolutely devastating to the civilian population. And most, if not all, of the remaining Palestinian physicians have suffered immeasurable personal loss while trying to continue to deliver care. My group, Doctors Against Genocide, has held weekly webinars with physicians in Gaza as well as in the West Bank to get real-time updates from Palestinian physicians. And we have heard testimonies on the conditions in the hospital and personal testimonies of torture of these physicians while in Israeli custody, as well as testimonies of what's going on the ground in Jenin in the West Bank. And our webinars, they've also included testimonies from medical students in Gaza. And these students have really laid bare the immense and escalating reliance on these students to provide care that they have just absolutely not been trained to deliver. And that's a stain on all of us in the medical community. There's been an obvious impact on their ongoing education and studies. We spoke to students residing in bombed out buildings who have been displaced upwards of 10 times using phones charged by solar panels to try and complete their studies, but just grateful to not be in a tent for the time being. And one student asked me to deliver a message to our greater medical community. She asked that she just simply be allowed to complete her education in safety so that she could one day serve her community in Gaza. And so, why am I mentioning these students? It's because we've had such an enormous number of master clinicians and specialists in Gaza who have been killed to date during this genocide. And any future healthcare system in Gaza will be predicated on our ability to train and nurture a next generation of Palestinian physicians. Specifically referencing women and girls, the collapse of the medical system is having obvious dire consequences with issues related to direct injury, pregnancy complications, traumatic birth, preterm delivery, inadequate lactation, and extreme mental stress. We do not, and we may never have really good data on the immediate and long-term health impacts on these women and babies. As a pulmonologist, I have grave concerns about the lung health of any of the surviving preterm, malnourished, and underweight infants. And I also have grave concerns about the sequelae of the inhalational injuries from debris, from aerosolized concrete and asbestos that we will see for decades to come. As a medical community, we must, obviously continue to push for unrestricted aid to enter and unrestricted entry of medical groups to tend to acute needs for immediate care. But, beyond this, we must continue to advocate tirelessly to the end of the policies that are leading to this genocide. And Doctors Against Genocide was founded because there was a deep understanding that genocide is a process and that genocide in Gaza has been unfolding for decades and has been decades in the making. We've been trying to mobilize the medical community to speak out, and we've been stunned by the silence of our institutions and our medical associations in the face of hospital bombardment, supply blockade, and physicians being abducted and tortured for what appears to be the apparent crime of refusing to abandon their patients. And so, protection of healthcare and children, we cannot allow it to be made controversial. And so we continue to advocate for structural change within our institutions, our associations, and with our politicians. Beyond my professional thoughts, I did feel compelled to share a few personal reflections, as a woman, as a mother, in keeping with today's panel. And so I hope you guys will allow me that latitude. When I think back over the years, I have found myself marking my life, by events in Gaza. I apologize. My daughter was born shortly before Castled in 2008, and I wondered if she would ever meet her grandparents who were in Gaza under bombardment. In the summer of 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, 11 members of my husband's family, including 5 children and his pregnant cousin, were killed when the IOF bombed their home. I was pregnant with my youngest child during that time, and my son was born extremely premature and in the NICU for many weeks. And all I could think about was how lucky he and I were to survive, to have had access to medical care, and how if we had been in Gaza during that time, and certainly now, he would have certainly died, and I likely would have died from lack of access to postpartum care like so many women in Gaza now. Or if we had been in the West Bank, how we could have been one checkpoint away from preventable death. When I look back on all my days and nights spent taking care of COVID patients during the pandemic, I cannot help but think of Gaza. And I actually went back to an entry from a diary from May of 2021 and just wanted to briefly paraphrase it. The head of the COVID-19 task force at Gaza was killed today. He worked closely with Doctors Without Borders, and I cannot even imagine or fathom the chasm his death will leave in the fragile healthcare system in Gaza. Probably similar to the chasm the latest bombings left on the road to his hospital. Patients cannot even be transported to the hospital at the moment. Let that sink in. The next time I consider patting myself on the back for my work during the COVID pandemic, I will think of him and check myself. The next time I lose my cool because the exact supply I needed for a procedure wasn't at my fingertips, I will think of him and remember how spoiled we all are. I will think of what it must be like to work without basic supplies, with only limited electricity, relying on gas generators, the lack of clean water, only to die buried under the rubble. Dying of COVID was probably the least of his worries. So this was from 2021. Since October of 2023, over 200 members of my husband's family have been killed. and we expect that number to rise in the coming days. Every type of death you have heard described, we have suffered. Entire branches of the family killed when family homes were leveled by bombs. A 20-day-old infant freezing to death in a tent in Rafah in January of 2024, after the rest of the family had been killed by car bombing along a quote-unquote safe route. Non-fatal injuries turning fatal due to the IOF preventing access to medical care. Direct targeting of children by quadcopters in our family. 3 elderly aunts from the extended family shot at point-blank range within their home, 2 quickly dying and the third left to die slowly, with the IOF denying the family access to evacuate her or render care, and then burning the house down, leaving only bones for burial. Babies nearly starving to death when their mother's milk supply was drying up and formula and clean water was scarce. A cousin yesterday sent a photo of her iftar consisting of a few ladles of soup for her and her 5 children, her anguish palpable. These are just a few stories, and we are just one family, but we, like all Palestinians, will not surrender. Let us all continue to do everything we can to deliver Palestinian freedom, dignity, health, and safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for sharing your first-hand experience, for your updates on the noble efforts of Doctors Against Genocide, and for that moving commentary at the end. I'd like to move to the next segment, which is opening the floor for comments and questions by committee members and observers. We will collect 2 to 3 questions. First, I invite members and observers who wish to speak to raise the hand feature in the Zoom app, and you will be unmuted. First, I have a request from, I have on my note here, Ms. Zonia Rivera Lopez, Deputy Secretary General of the Federation of Cuban Women. She is the head of the Cuba delegation to the CSW. She will deliver her remarks in Spanish, and an interpreter from the Cuban mission will support with interpretation. If you're ready, Ms. Rivero Lopez, you have the floor.
Buenos días, excelencias, estimados participantes, hermanos palestinos. Para mí es un orgullo hoy traer estos aretes que representan ese hermano pueblo. Son de color verde, representan la esperanza y siempre para nosotros va a ser ese grito de esperanza y de libertad también para nuestras hermanas palestinas.
Excellencies, dear participants, Palestinian brothers and sisters, it is an honor for me to wear these earrings that identify the sister state of Palestine. They are in green, which represents freedom and hope for our Palestinian sisters.
Marzo debería ser un mes de celebración para las mujeres en todo el mundo. Sin embargo, no es posible celebrar plenamente mientras nuestras hermanas palestinas continúan enfrentando cada día el rostro más cruel del genocidio y del apartheid.
March should be a month of celebration for women around the world. However, it is not possible to fully celebrate while our courageous Palestinian sisters continue to face the cruelest side of genocide and apartheid regime every day.
A pesar del acuerdo de cese al fuego en la Franja de Gaza, tan demandado por la amplia mayoría de la comunidad internacional, el pueblo palestino continúa siendo víctima de crímenes de guerra y lesa humanidad. Israel retoma sus bombardeos contra Gaza, con la complicidad del gobierno de Estados Unidos, de quien ha recibido apoyo financiero, político, militar y logístico para cometer semejantes actos de brutalidad e injusticia.
Despite the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, which has been long awaited and called for by the overwhelming majority of the international community, the Palestinian people continue to be victims of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel resumes its bombardments against Gaza with the complicity of the United States government, from whom it has received financial, political, military, and logistical support to carry out such acts of brutality and injustice.
Durante los últimos 17 meses, el genocidio israelí contra el pueblo palestino ha provocado la muerte de más de 48.500 personas en la Franja de Gaza, entre ellas más de 12.200 mujeres y 17.800 niños y más de 112.000 heridos. En la Franja de Gaza, el 70% de las víctimas son niños y mujeres. Estas cifras representan el dolor de niños huérfanos y madres que han perdido a sus hijos, el sufrimiento de familias desplazadas y hogares totalmente desintegrados.
Over the past 17 months, the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people has resulted in the deaths of more than 48,500 people in the Gaza Strip, including more than 12,200 women and 17,800 children, and more than 112,000 injured. In the Gaza Strip, 70% of the victims are children and women. These figures represent the pain of orphaned children and mothers who have lost their children, the suffering of displaced families, and homes totally disintegrated.
En este contexto, la potencia ocupante niega además la entrada de la indispensable ayuda humanitaria a estos territorios, incluso en el mes sagrado del Ramadán. Rechazamos la prohibición por parte de Israel de las actividades de UNRWA en su territorio y de contactos con sus autoridades. La labor de UNRWA es esencial para garantizar la llegada de asistencia humanitaria a quienes lo necesitan desesperadamente, entre ellos las mujeres y las niñas palestinas.
In this context, the occupying power continues to deny the entry of essential humanitarian aid into these territories, even during the holy month of Ramadan. We reject Israel's prohibition of UNRWA's activities in its territory and of contacts with its authorities. UNRWA's work is essential to ensure the delivery of humanitarian assistance to those in desperate need, including Palestinian women and girls.
Las pretensiones expansionistas de Israel de apoderarse de Gaza, con la complicidad declarada del gobierno de los Estados Unidos, no extinguirán el legítimo anhelo de miles de mujeres palestinas de ejercer su derecho a la libre determinación, a vivir en paz en la tierra que les pertenece y a disponer de un Estado independiente y soberano dentro de las fronteras anteriores a 1967, con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital, que garantiza igualmente el derecho al retorno de los refugiados.
Israel's expansionist pretensions to take over Gaza, with the declared complicity of the United States government, will not extinguish the legitimate yearning of thousands of Palestinian women to exercise their right to self-determination, to live in peace on the land that belongs to them, and to have an independent and sovereign state within the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, which also guarantees the right of return of refugees.
Debe cesar la impunidad de Israel, cuyos crímenes han provocado la destrucción de viviendas, escuelas e infraestructura civil, así como la privación de los servicios de agua, alimentos y electricidad, acciones que constituyen graves violaciones del derecho internacional humanitario. Israel ha obstaculizado también el pleno disfrute de los derechos humanos de las mujeres palestinas, quienes han sido víctimas de inanición sistemática, desplazamiento forzoso, violencia y han padecido los efectos de la crisis sanitaria y el acceso limitado a servicios vitales.
Israel's impunity must cease, whose victims have resulted in the destruction of homes, schools, and civilian infrastructures, as well as the deprivation of water, food, and electricity, actions that constitute grave violations of international humanitarian law. Israel has also obstructed the full enjoyment of the human rights of Palestinian women who have been victims of systematic starvation, forced displacement, violence, and have suffered the effects of the health crisis and limited access to vital services.
Los daños ocasionados a hospitales y centros de salud, incluidas las ambulancias, han sido devastadores y han obstaculizado el acceso a las personas, entre ellas las mujeres, a servicios sanitarios esenciales. A ellos se añaden los ataques contra el personal sanitario, tan necesario en estos momentos. 1.068 hombres y mujeres del personal médico han perdido su vida a lo largo de estos meses.
Damage to hospitals and health centers, including ambulances, have been devastating, preventing people, including women, from accessing essential health services. This has been compounded by attacks on much-needed health workers. 1,068 male and female health workers have lost their lives in recent months.
A nuestras hermanas palestinas enviamos nuestro firme mensaje inquebrantable de solidaridad y profunda admiración por su digna resistencia. Cuentan con nuestro apoyo invariable a su legítima causa. Todas somos palestinas. Muchas gracias.
To our Palestinian sisters, we send our strong message and unwavering solidarity and deep admiration for their dignified resistance. You can count on our unshakable support for our legitimate cause. We are all Palestinian. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rivero Lopez. Muchas gracias for this informative and passionate comments. Returning back to our order of business, I opened the floor earlier for questions. So far, I did not see any raised hands. With that, I would like to give the floor once again to Ambassador Feda Abdelhady Nasir for her thoughts before we close the event. Feda, are you ready?
Apologies, just unmuting my mic. Thank you, Chair. I would really want to express first and foremost sincerest thanks to Doctors Mofokeng, Syed, and Sukkar for their moving presentations regarding the grave situation faced by women and girls in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, at the hands of this illegal and inhumane occupation. And of course, also to thank the esteemed Minister of Cuba, who has joined us and made such a passionate expression of solidarity for Palestinian women and for the Palestinian people. And lastly, to Ms. Zaynab Al-Ghunaimi for her inspiring testimony from Gaza. This event, despite the difficulties and the glitches, has shown a painful but necessary spotlight on the particular hardships and indignities being endured by our women and girls. Perhaps helping us to better understand the horrific reality that they are living through, but also better understand what is urgently needed to help them, to protect them, and to stand in solidarity with them. They are living through untold trauma and sheer torment, terrorized by a genocidal war on them, their families, and their people, by an occupier that has not hidden its aims to ethnically cleanse them and erase them from their homeland, violating every rule of law, every human right, and even the most basic premises of humanity, as it targets them and their loved ones, women being left as widows, burying thousands of their children, and there is no greater loss for any mother, and leaving thousands of children orphaned without their mothers, their right to life under constant threat. But I want to add that what we heard today, including from the formidable Zaynab Al-Ghunaimi, woman leader and genocide survivor, until now, also reminds us of the resilience of Palestinian women, who, despite such immense burdens and adversity, continue playing their pivotal roles in their families, in their communities, and in society in Palestine as a whole. They are still caring for their children and families, still serving as role models and pillars of perseverance in their communities. And these same women continue to inspire and to serve as doctors, nurses, humanitarians, journalists, charity cooks, and in every other capacity against the odds, caring for their people in the midst of an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe and the most devastating, destructive war on a civilian population in this century. But their ability to cope, and we've heard this today, has been severely weakened by decades of illegal occupation and this horrific genocide. And their legendary resilience and resourcefulness are at a breaking point and cannot be taken for granted. They are in need of solidarity and support to ensure their protection, their health, their well-being, and their survival. This requires urgent action to secure humanitarian aid and an immediate ceasefire to stop the killing and the maiming and the destruction. And it requires serious action to ensure accountability for all the crimes perpetrated by Israel in order to bring an end to its illegal, abhorrent occupation and to uphold justice and enable them to realize their human rights as women and as Palestinians, including their inalienable rights to return and to self-determination and independence, to live as free human beings in dignity and peace and security in their homeland, Palestine. And I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Division for Palestinian Rights on behalf of the committee, and once again, thank the Special Rapporteur and Drs. Syed and Sukkar for joining us today, and all of the committee members that have joined us, again, including the esteemed Minister of Cuba. Thank you to everyone for their solidarity and for your continuing support to the Palestinian people through this darkest chapter in their history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Feda, for your comments. I have been advised by the organizer that there is a request to take the floor for a question or commentary by our colleagues from Egypt. I will give the floor to them and to be followed by comments from the panelists after that, immediately after that. Go ahead. I have on the screen here, Egypt DPR Heba Mustafa. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I didn't want to have like a final say after our dear sister Feda from Palestine, but I wanted also to come in and express our continued and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their cause. And we wanted to salute the unwavering resilience of Palestinian women, and seated in the comfort of our rooms here, heated rooms, air-conditioned, between walls that provide us with the proper shelter. It is harrowing to see and watch and listen to the field experience of what the Palestinians have been suffering, not only in Gaza, and it's not only about health, it's about the entirety of their rights, the right to life, their right to a dignified life, the right to self-determination. And these rights have to be exercised for them, not only as Palestinians or as women, but also as human beings. And this is what the international community is failing greatly in standing up for. So we also salute people in the field who are there to help and assist and face the atrocities that are being committed by Israel, the occupying power, against Palestinians in their homeland, especially also the resumption of the attacks, the brutal attacks on Gaza. And we have also to be alerted that even the brutal attacks on Gaza, when they were stopped briefly, they did not really stop. And we were having other atrocities and violations happening elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territories, specifically also in the West Bank. And this requires that we all work together, and maybe we need also as committee and as us as a group of countries who are supportive of the Palestinian cause, that what we have listened to today is more publicized and more made visible to the international community in order to remove all the barriers and the misinformation and disinformation about the suffering of the Palestinian people. The more we get information and the showcasing of the suffering of the Palestinian people, the more we get the pressure that is required in order for action to happen to stop the fighting and work for the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, to the right to self-determination, and end the suffering that they are passing through right now. Thank you.
Thank you to my friend DPR of Egypt for the commentary. I would like to open the floor again for the panelists for about, let's say, 5 minutes or so. If you have other comments before we adjourn the session, please indicate so if you do. Dr. Mofokeng, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the ambassadors and different delegates who are joining also online, and also to my dear colleagues in the medical profession. I think it's important to also at this moment, make the issue for all of us that we also understand to remain human, it is to remain tapped into the emotion and how difficult that this is. And I know that for many of us, we often feel guilt when we cannot show up, and mentally we are completely exhausted. And I think moments like this, and thank you very much, Ambassador Feda, for convening us, it reminds us of our collective power. Because as individuals, we will feel tired, we will feel exhausted. But I think it's in that collective that we can really take our mandate, take on the work that often seems and feels insurmountable. But we are here and we are resisting. And by just being here, it is a big step, it is a big moment to show not just an insistence on the application of international human rights law, but an insistence on accountability. And every single moment of meeting, of coming together, of intentionally remaining connected is very, very important. And I know there are folks who are online as well who cannot participate but want to pass on the message of a complete and an unwavering solidarity. And the reproductive justice framework, for me in closing, Chair, demands that we create safe and sustainable communities where women can make choices related to their own sexual and reproductive health and their own journey and what that looks like, and that we have systems and structures in place to ensure that those rights are protected and promoted regardless of the outcome. But a genocide is completely unacceptable as one of the things that play a role in the kinds of outcomes we are seeing right now. And so in the spirit of solidarity, I wish for all of us that we can connect one day outside of what imperialism and racism defines for us, outside of this constant fight that literally takes everything out of us. I wish for us for a world where we can thrive, where everyone everywhere can live a life of dignity, where being vulnerable is respected as part of being a human experience, and that we do not allow any people in positions of power to take advantage of people who are in vulnerable situations. And from my mandate's point of view, you can look forward to a report on healthcare workers that I'll be presented to the Human Rights Council in June, and the same thematic report on human rights on healthcare workers as human rights defenders that I'll be presenting to the General Assembly in October. And that is one way of showing the formidable role that healthcare workers play in the protection of human rights and other interconnected human rights. So it's not a coincidence that we have other doctors on this convening today to share those experiences, but to shake awake the medical fraternity that is just quietly watching by a genocide happen, quietly watching by as the practice of medicine is being attacked. So it's my hope that all of us today have filled each other's cups in one way or another to be able to take another step forward in the protection of human rights of the people of the occupied Palestinian territory. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Doctor. I'm looking around the screen. I see a raised hand at the screen of our esteemed friends from Cuba. Do you wish to speak? Or?
No, it must have.
No solicitamos la palabra, pero nuestro cariño y nuestra solidaridad siempre. Y ha sido muy conmovedor todo lo que hemos podido compartir con ustedes aquí hoy. Es verdad que son más que números, imágenes desgarradoras de mujeres, de niñas, de personal sanitario, de compañeros de salud hoy que incondicionalmente pues están enfrentando allí. Y yo creo que somos un símbolo de lucha y de resistencia, y compartiendo ese dolor también estamos compartiendo la solidaridad con Palestina.
No, it must have been an error, but we just wanted to show our care, our solidarity for all the Palestinian people. These are more than numbers. These are emotional images. We could see also and hear the experience of health workers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to our friends from the esteemed delegation of Cuba. I see no other requests for the floor, or should I say this for the screen. Let me again thank the panelists for sharing their insightful information and personal stories, and for this very insightful discussion about an important and as well as difficult topic. Your solemn and sobering accounts have been enlightening and have once again reminded us of what is happening on the ground in Gaza, which we hope will cease very soon, and also importantly highlighted the importance of women's perspectives and to the high price paid by women for the achievement of a just and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine. It has been an honor for me to chair this event on behalf of the chair of the committee. The Secretariat will prepare a summary of this discussion that will be posted on the committee's website and circulated through social media. Again, I thank the panelists. I thank Feda from Permanent Mission, Ambassador Feda from the delegation of Palestine. We look forward to your ongoing engagement and to welcome you in future activities of the committee. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador.
Ambassador Sufyan, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you.